Okay. Where are you originally from?
I was born in Brookfield, Connecticut, which is a little town between Danbury and New Milford, western part of Connecticut.
What was life growing up?
My father had a large farm, and we had cattle and chickens and all sorts of things, and raised garden vegetables and sold them and things like that. It was about 100-acre farm, and I was an only child, so I grew up going to a one-room schoolhouse and went to Danbury High School, and then I went to Bard College, which is part of Columbia University at that time, which is on the Hudson.
How did you become like a reverend? Like what?
Well, yeah. First of all, my mother was an Episcopalian and grew up. Her family really founded the church in the 18th century that we have there in Brookfield, St. Paul's. And my mother also played the organ, and so as a child I was always taken to church. My father had been a Congregationalist, but then when he married my mother he became an Episcopalian also. So that I was really grew up in the church, and so that it just was very natural to always go to church every Sunday.
Do you have any role models growing up?
Well, in my early years in the parish church at St. Paul's, we had a wonderful priest. His name was Charles Carpenter. He was a very gentle, kind pastor, and my family were very fond of him, and he was a very, very good minister and priest. And I suppose in a way I never thought about the ministry at all. In fact, my mother had expected I would go to Yale. I was already accepted, and I was to study law, but she died when I was a junior in high school, and which was a very traumatic experience. And I then decided I wasn't sure I wanted to go to Yale, and instead had this opportunity to go to Bard College, which had just entered a whole new educational program, which was very, very modern, very liberal. So they accepted me, so I went there. And it was a small school, 150 students. It originally had been a college which prepared men for going on to seminary. But by my time, most of it, very few, there were only 3 or 4 others in my class who went into ministry. But even when I went to Bard, I had no intention of going into ministry. I was still probably going to go into law or teaching. But I became a member of the choir, and we had compulsory chapel those days, 2 evenings a week and on Sunday. I then got a job ringing the bell every night to tell people about services. And I don't know, we had a very fine chaplain there, and little by little, I don't know, by the end of my second year, I began to think this maybe is the way I should go. So I came to see the bishop here in Connecticut, and he encouraged me. And I checked with the seminary to find out about my courses that I would need to finish college. And so when I graduated, I then went on to New York to the General Theological Seminary, which is one of our largest seminaries and oldest seminaries in New York. And that's a 3-year course, so I graduated there. And at that time I was 24, I think.
24. When did you decide to go on to get your PhD in?
I began my ministry in New London, where I served for 5 years. Plus, I was in the Maritime Commission for about a year at the end of the war. War ended while I was in. So then I came to Hartford to join the cathedral, and in 2 years I was made canon, and so I stayed the rest of my ministry, which is 40 years, there. So while I was there, I became involved in youth work, and I became head of the youth of our church in Connecticut and then in New England, and I was on the National Commission. And I was and I ran the summer conferences for high school young people. And I had a big youth program in the cathedral. And I did all that and other things. And then I began to get into social action things. I was asked to be a part of the Capital Region Conference of Churches and on their social action committee. And we worked in the field of alcoholism and drug addiction. And that was, I went to the University of Connecticut and took a semester course in alcoholism. And while I was on this action committee, we got a call from a church in East Hartford about a janitor who had molested a boy, and they wanted to know if there was any help that they could get for either the boy's family or for the janitor himself, I guess. So we really didn't know what to do. We had never faced this issue. Come around on the other side.
Isaac.
Is that Isaac? Yeah.
Well,
Hi, Isaac.
I'll pause the videotape.
He's a little fellow, isn't he? Yeah.
Okay.
Well, when this committee of the Capital Region Conference of Churches were asked to try to provide help or information on this event of this janitor who had molested a child, we felt compelled to do something. So the first thing was to find if there was some literature, some books or something. So for some reason I was assigned that job, so I began searching for help through literature and books and so forth. And even went to New York to the Seeker Society and got pamphlets, and then began to get books. And then we decided to form a special committee of some other professionals. We had psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers, and many of them lay people. We had some other clergy. And we met in the YMCA at Hartford. They granted us a meeting place for our committee. And they put on the, when you come in, you know, all the things are listed, the directory, and it said the homosexual committee will meet in such and such a room. Well, this is way back now in the late 50s, early 60s, and the directors almost fainted. And they recognized who we were, but they said, could you not use the word homosexual? So we became the Project H committee, which could have been anything. It could have been Project Heterosexual. But anyway, for us it became Project H committee, and that existed for several years, that committee. We not only wanted literature, but we wanted professional people who might know something. And again, back in New York, there was an organization called the George W. Henry Foundation. George Henry was a psychiatrist. And the person who ran the foundation was a well-educated man. He had a degree from Amherst, a degree from Harvard, and a doctorate from Edinburgh. And so they formed the George W. Henry Foundation, which had a motto of to help those who, by reason of their homosexuality, were in trouble with themselves, society, or the law. And Dr. Gross did a great deal in those days helping people, because those days homosexuals were thrown out of their families, thrown out of their churches, thrown out of their jobs, and of course many flocked to New York where you got lost, and so often they came without any money or any job or any place to stay. So this foundation tried to find help for them. And in addition to that, Dr. Gross also wrote a very good book. Plus, he did a lot of lecturing and writing. He was a brilliant writer. So we then asked him to come to Hartford and help us, and we established a chapter of the George Henry Foundation here in Hartford, and I became the head of that. And then later on, when Dr. Gross died, I became head of the whole foundation. But things changed pretty rapidly, and so the need for that wasn't essential, so it's passed out of existence. But it was very crucial at that time, very much so.
What were the goals of that organization at the time? Like, did you have any goals?
Well, as I say, primarily to help people.
Mm-hmm.
The individual that, as I say, came to New York and had no place to go and needed help. I mean, it was a very practical kind of thing. And counseling was provided as well. And so that's how I began to get involved in the counseling, because people would come to our Project H committee and they would have some problem with their family, or just last night when I was at a housewarming party, somebody came up to me and said, well, Canon, you won't remember me, but I was 16 when I came to see you, and I knew I was gay, but my family were troubled and I was troubled and I didn't know what to do. And you helped me, and he said I've had a wonderful life, and he was very appreciative. So that's the kind of thing that we did in those days.
That's good. On this, like, what are the Episcopal Church's views on homosexuality? I mean, it seems almost more laid back than, say, like the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, first of all, some other churches have become what we call affirming, particularly in the United, the UTC, which is the old Congregational Church. Many churches, individual churches, become what we call affirming, and there they accept homosexual persons and so forth. Now the Unitarian, Universalists, the Quakers, even now today some of the Jewish synagogues are accepting. In the Episcopal Church, we've been a little slower. I served for 3 years on a committee of bishops of the church. We had 3 psychiatrists and 5 bishops and myself. And we met around the country and trying to come up with some. And it comes to our conventions all the time about, for instance, accepting the blessing of a relationship, actually, of people who are gay, couples, either 2 men or 2 women. And there are some bishops that are very accepting, and some clergy, and then there are some that are quite opposite. We don't have a national position yet. Still working on it.
So basically over time, why was it to help out people, the gay or gay and lesbian community? The reason why you focus a lot of your time in work.
Yeah. I just put something in. I knew I had to get some credentials because I was in the counseling, got into counseling thing. So I went to New York for 2 years, about 1969 or thereabouts, and I took a course at the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health in New York, which grants a certification in counseling. And then I also got a master's degree from the New York Theological Seminary because I was working out the theological aspects of all of this. So in 69, 70, I got certification and a master's at that time. I do have a doctorate, but that's an honorary doctorate from my college. I was active there. And but once I had that, then I had the credentials I needed to do the counseling. Now the counseling was done at the cathedral. I had a suite of rooms there, and I had a secretary, and that's where we had the library that began to build. Ended up with about 1,500 books, which I gave to the University Central. But so much of my time then was spent in counseling, and then I also did a lot of lecturing. I lectured all over the country, and also I had 2 lecture tours in England. I lectured in France. So, and then I did a lot of papers, and of course I wrote little books and things. So that was all part of that time. There's another dimension, if it's all right to bring this in. When I was starting in this and working with it, I also began to identify people who were what we now call transsexual. Mm-hmm. The transsexual is a whole different story, but anyway, and once again back to New York, I discovered the Erickson Educational Foundation, which was founded by quite a wealthy man in Louisiana who was actually a female-to-male transsexual. He gave $1 million to do this. And they were very helpful with material. Also, they sponsored a convention every other year, and I was invited to do a paper with those. I did a paper in Stanford, in California, Stanford University, and several places in the United States, also in the Netherlands and Bordeaux in France, and in England. So it was quite an outreach, really, working with. Then we established our own transsexual organization, which is still going, and that's called the 20 Club XX, which stands for transsex. Those days, you see, you had to use synonyms and things because it was too blatant to just put it right out. So we started a group, and that's been going on, still going on, and I've served all these years, that's 27 years, I think, as their kind of advisor and so forth. And we also organize the Gender Identity Clinic of New England, which is a professional organization which evaluates people who are transsexual. Our board is, I've been on the board as one of the founding members of the board. We have a psychiatrist, a psychologist, an endocrinologist, and we've had other professionals, doctors and lawyers. And it's a very fine group. It met in my offices. I had the center many years, and then it's now moved to New Britain. Dr. Kathleen Sterner she's a PhD psychologist. She directs that. And this invites people who consider themselves transsexual to come, and we evaluate them to see if this is true. And if it is true, then we refer them for hormonal therapy, and they have to be, then a year later, if everything goes well, then we recommend them for actual sex reassignment surgery. But this is not, these are, now some of those people may, having transferred over from one sex to the other, one gender identity to the other, they may enter into a homosexual relationship. In other words, a male might become a female and then relate to a female in a lesbian relationship, or vice versa.
How on the board, how does one identify, like, what are basically the steps that identify a transsexual?
Well, first of all, is what they say they feel they are. Mm-hmm. And then I always did all the social histories. So over and over and over again, it would be, I remember when I was 3 years old, I liked to dress up, I'd steal my sister's clothes or something. Mm-hmm. So very early in life, this identity emerges. Now, it's always been there. A person who's transsexual, and the same for the homosexual, I think they are actually born that way. I think it's not something anybody would suddenly decide they wanted to do. It's not an easy road. It's a very, very difficult road. So, but for many, it's a very successful and satisfying role. And so our job as a board is always to go back and get the cues, you know. And of course, there are a lot of tragedies here. People are thrown away out of their families. Some are disowned completely. And the church is doing pretty well. That's doing better on that road than on the homosexual road. And we have had several transsexuals who have moved on. We've even had clergy who are transsexual. And some of them have been allowed to remain in their ministries.
Why do you think it's easier for transsexual, like the church in accepting transsexuals opposed to homosexuals?
Well, I think one of the reasons in this regard, Don, is the fact that there's more evidence, clinical evidence, that the transsexual has this identity from very early years. Mm-hmm. Now, many of the people who don't know enough about homosexuality, in my mind, think that somehow people make their choice about being homosexual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the church tries to say, well, it's just because you were obstinate and you wanted to be different or this, that, or the other. And they don't deal with the fact that the person who's homosexual probably has been homosexual since birth. And that over the years, you see, some people don't deal with their homosexuality until very late in life. Sometimes they're in their 40s and 50s when they finally will begin to deal with it. That's why you find a lot of people who've been married and have children, and the ordinary citizen would say, well, goodness sakes, how could he have had children, gotten married and so forth? Well, he denied his sexuality. He denied, he didn't want to deal with it, but finally somewhere along in his life it happens. And he decides that's what he's going to do. So, and all things happen. The stories are amazing all the way through.
Like when you were counseling homosexuals, was there ever a point in time where you try to point them to the to be heterosexual?
Not necessarily. I mean, certainly, I would say to anybody that being homosexual is a very difficult situation, and I wouldn't advise anybody to choose it by any manner of means. My feeling has always been, if you are homosexual, well, it seems the happiest thing for you in the long run is to deal with it and accept it. And thank goodness our society is more tolerant now than it was in the days I was in those earlier years. But I know there are religious organizations and there are churches who think that you can change people. I don't believe that myself. They may say they've changed, but I think down deep, it's their feelings are. See, our feelings are very different, but they're the real things, the feelings. I wouldn't know how to change anybody anyway.
Yeah.
No, I have no. I think I could make an awful lot of money if I had some way of doing that. In fact, all through these years, the money I charged, I never charged for counseling. It's all free.
Oh, wow. You've written some books over time. Were they accepted by the community and like the gay, lesbian community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think pretty well. I wrote the 3 books. They all are out of print now. One of them has had a second printing, I think. But a lot more material has come out, over the years. I mean, so much material. And mine was a little bit early, maybe. But many of the book parties I had and gatherings, around the country, were in churches. And I even had, I guess the first party I had was right in the cathedral, and a lot of people came, and they all knew me. Of course, I think actually, John, one of the successes that I had was the fact I had been in the cathedral for 20 years. They knew me, they respected, I hope. And the fact that I began to do this rather outreach ministry, they trusted me, I think. And so it never was a problem. I didn't have any trouble with the bishops or the other clergy. Or there were a few other clergy who weren't very happy about what I was doing, but for the majority, it's never been a problem. Of course, I've been in the diocese my whole life.
Yeah.
61 years this year.
Yeah,
I've been ordained.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Like so the church was fairly accepting of your works.
Yes. I never had too many brickbats. Once in a while you get a telephone call or something, but very, very little. I was very spared in that way. And the groups, I mean, the cathedral's been wonderful because our 20 Club, the transsexual group, still meets at the cathedral. It meets twice a month in the cathedral, and they've always been very cordial, and even pleased that we're liberal enough to do this, you see.
So, since you had a lot to do with the gay and lesbian community, and as far as the transsexual community, have you ever had any negative feedback from, like, say, like the community, like for trying to help out the gay and lesbians and transsexuals?
You mean somebody who was very negative about it?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say so. And I've been pretty much out in public. If you go back to some newspapers and things, one time they came out with a big picture of me, and it said the patriarch of the gay community. A lot of people just laughed. They thought it was kind of funny, rather than anything. Nobody ever got back on my back about it. And as I say, and of course the picture is changing now a lot. I mean, just think of what's happening in the gay lesbian community. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, Lambda. And of course, my opinion right now is, although we needed to have the support of the religious community and others, I think the only way that the gay community, the transsexual community are going to get equality is through the courts and the legislatures. I think that's the only place they really need to work, and that's what they are doing now. And legislatures banging away, and it's a little hard because you got a good many conservatives in the legislature. It's very difficult for congressmen and legislators to come out if they're gay. Now, some have. We know that. We've had some in Connecticut. And I applaud them for their courage to do that. But it's risky because this is a heavy Roman Catholic state. And so the Roman Catholic community has been somewhat negative. Doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of gay Roman Catholics. I can speak about this because it did become public. I won't identify it, but in the transsexual situation, within it was just shortly 3-4 years ago, 5 years, we had a priest who in his 60s came to us, and this person is truly a woman, and wonderful person, wonderful, had a wonderful ministry, was a very kind priest, but that finally decided that it's time, and our board, which is, as I say, a very fine board, professional people, very cautious, very careful, but we followed through. She's had surgery, she's living a life now as a female. And the good thing about it for her, she was at that time in life, in the 60s, that she could, unfortunately, I think, had some funds and so forth in a home, so she could survive. I've met with her family. She has an Irish family, and I go to Ireland every year, so I know the family there. They've been pretty well accepting. But just a wonderful person, and But if somebody would say, oh, that's a strange story, well, it's a true one. So, and she's happy. That's good.
What would you think your greatest accomplishment is? Like, with everything that you've done in your life?
Oh, I don't know. Sticking with it, I guess, is the best you can do. I guess, we do believe. I'm a firm believer in our Lord and the Church and God and the Holy Spirit, and sometimes we don't know what's happening, but maybe the Spirit calls us to do some things, and fortunately, and as far as I'm concerned, I think that the Church ought to be on the front edge of things, not be bringing up the rear.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, I think I've been on the front line a bit, and escaped pretty well, in the sense that I've had the support of the Church and bishops and my congregation that I was with for all those years. And of course, I'm still working. I've been retired now. I retired in 1986, so that's, 16 years. But I'm still preaching every Sunday, somewhere.
Wow.
And doing a lot of other things.
Well, I think I'll turn the interview over to Isaac now.
Just give me a few minutes to set up.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, I can't introduce.
Don't call me a cardinal.
Yeah, I'm sorry, wrong church.
I'm fine.
Okay. We're just going to pick up the interview with a couple of follow-up questions. In regards to the council, the Project H committee being put together, how was that planned? How was that put together? Who were the people?
Well, one of the important people that started at that time and has stayed with it right up to the time he retired was Dr. George Higgins. He was professor of psychology at Trinity College and counselor for the college. And Dr. Higgins was one of the key people all along. He helped form the Gender Identity Clinic, and he was interested in the gay movement. But toward as things went along, he really concentrated on the transsexual community because he had the office and he served as the psychologist, you see. So they would come to see me, and I would do the social history, and they would go to see him, and he would get the psychological, all the battery of psychological tests. Then they were referred, and we had two psychiatrists, Dr. Felber and Dr. Gold, and then they would go to one of those psychiatrists. They'd have a psychiatric examination. Then they would move on to the endocrinologist who did this physical exam, and Dr. Seiler, who was one time on the faculty of our medical school, and is an endocrinologist. He would evaluate people as to whether it makes sense for them to have hormones, and if so, how much, and so forth and so on. And then he would be the one person that the client would go to every 2 or 3 months for checkups. The others of us were always available to a person so that they could come back and talk with us or anything. And then we had the 20 Club, the XX Club, for them to come where they could have peer support. I don't have anything to do with the 20 Club except to be there as a resource person And if I can be helpful in some problem, then I do. Somebody needs a lawyer, somebody has to get a birth certificate, somebody needs to get a passport. We have to learn how you go around to get those things, you see. And then there'd be family problems. So we invite families to come. A person can bring their spouse, or many of them have, or bring their children. We've had children come, or bring anybody, friends, or whatever they want. We don't allow newspaper reporters or people like that to come, but anybody that's identified as one of the participants in the group.
Now, there were two incidents that led up to the, how can I say, the committee being formed. The East Hartford janitor, I believe. And there was also another couple that came to the church in regards to mistreatment of prisoners.
Ah, yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I kind of forgot that. Yes, they discovered, there was a family from Kent, and I don't remember their name, but they were concerned about the prisons, and I think one was a teacher, maybe at Kent School. But anyway, they appealed to us because homosexuals who have been arrested were put in a separate unit, and they weren't allowed to go to the library. Their meals were all at the oddest times. They were being badly abused. So then, what's his name? He was the assistant minister at the Central Baptist Church. And he and I went up to the prison to talk with the warden to see what we could do to straighten some of this out. And we got some cooperation. And then I began to go to the prison, and I did this through the mental health clinic there, and interview and counsel some of the prisoners who were gay or transsexual. And I did that as a volunteer for about 20 years. And I didn't go every week. I'd maybe go every 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. And I would go in any... And then sometimes when they came out of prison, they would come to see me, and because they'd need a job, sometimes very practical things, or some place to live, or want to counsel with a family situation.
Now, you've written numerous books.
Well, I did 3 books, yeah.
What about homosexuality, homosexuality and counseling, and understanding gay relatives and friends. What was the, how can I say, the idea that you was trying to bring across with these books or these themes?
Well, in the first, What About Homosexuality, that was really written for youth. I wrote that I was asked to write that book so that it would be something that teenagers could read, and so it's not a lot of jargon, medical grammar. It's kind of straightforward advice about what is homosexuality and is it sinful, is it curable, and so forth and so on. And just something to be helpful to young people facing this. Homosexuality and counseling was written because there was very, very little material at that time for anything in that field. What kind of an attitude do you have to be a good counselor of homosexuals? And some of the counseling problems that you run into if you're counseling gay people. And in all of them, I always put in something on the transsexual issue. There would always be a chapter or two. The third one I did more or less on, as I recall, should have brought that down, but a gay teacher, a gay athlete, a gay clergyman, a gay social worker or something, different kind of professions, and a gay father, and then also in the transsexual, someone who had a transsexual. That's Seamus, yes.
Wow.
John already saw the bigger boy.
Wow.
But so that was, and although none of them were real, I mean, there was no such. Everybody had a name. Of course, you gave them names. Pick out anything I wanted, and they're prototypes. That's what they really were. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that's in there would have happened in the counseling room, but I was very careful. So many times somebody would come and say, "Oh, I think you were writing about me." I said, "No, I don't think so at all. I didn't even think about it." But so they so identified with it, you see. And that was that one.
Okay. I'm thinking again, when the committee was put together, did anybody in that committee, before anybody knew who was in the committee, of course, knew anything about homosexuality? Was it something that was already studied, or was it just a buzzword going around?
It's kind of an interesting question. Well, we had a psychiatrist from the Institute of Living on our board in the very early years. We had 4 or 5 clergy, other clergy. We had social workers, and we had a couple of laymen or laywomen who were liberal people, and it was always a case of trying to share what any of us knew. This is actually true now, I'm going to tell you. We had been meeting for quite a little while. We used to meet every month, I think. When somebody said, you know, some of us, I bet, don't know a homosexual. And so, well, all right. So they looked at me, and because I had started these groups, you see, and they said, well, Clint Kennedy, you must know somebody. I said, well, I do. I know quite a few, but I said, I would hesitate to ask them to come because they're so frightened about their being identified, you know. Well, then somebody said, maybe we could put a bag over their head and just cut out the thing so that, you know, make holes in the bag. Now that's where we were way back then, you see. Now today you've got people coming out on the radio and the television and theater. You know, I mean, it's a different world today than we were way back 35 years ago. And it's come very fast, actually. But that is a true story. We didn't do it, fortunately. But I had the same thing happen when I was on that. I don't know if you heard me speak about that. There was a commission in our Episcopal Church to study the church, and they used the word the homophile. Well, I'm not sure that's a great word, but that was the name of the committee. And there were 5 bishops, 3 psychiatrists, and myself. And we met for 3 years, all different parts of the country. And so suddenly that committee came up to the fact, well, gay clergy, who are the gay clergy? I said, I know gay clergy. I said, I'll get you 5 gay clergy, and they have to be protected. But I said, you pay for where we're going to meet, for their transportation and hotel and so forth, but I'll get you 5 clergy. And I did. And I must say, I must have seen 12 before I got 5, because they were pretty skittish, you see. But they came. That changed the whole spirit of that gathering, because here were bishops finally having to sit there and talk with very fine, able, wonderful clergy who were gay. And that always changes people's attitude when they know somebody is homosexual, and they discover they don't have horns and aren't green or something, you know.
I always allude to the fact that when you think of the word gay, you think of a happy person. You think of a person that's always in a good mood.
Yeah.
Okay. When the term for gay was used in connection with homosexuality, I mean, what was the feeling behind that? Because again, you don't. Well, maybe not then, but today the two words go hand in hand. You can't separate the two.
I read an editorial, it's a good question. I read an editorial one time about somebody complaining that the word gay, as we all knew it earlier, as it was a gay event, a happy event, or a person is very gay, he's very happy. That we've lost that meaning. And now today, when you use the word gay, it's pretty much identified with the homosexual situation. But that's what happens in the English. And how in the world the word gay ever really came to denote the homosexual, I've never been able to fathom that. Because in my mind, there's nothing very gay about being homosexual. It carries an awful burden, a lot of problems. And nobody would, if they're in their right mind, would choose to be gay. But that's it. There's a certain percentage of our population which is gay. And there has always been, and there always will be, I think.
My next question goes back to the foundation, the
George W. Henry
Foundation. You spoke a little about Albert Gross, Dr. Albert Gross.
Yes.
And I guess that's where my next question leads to, because I know you was in connection or contact with him a lot in regards to information.
That's right.
Could you tell us a little bit more about Dr. Gross?
Yeah.
And also, and this will probably just lead into what you say about Dr. Gross, is what happened when he came to Hartford?
Well, that's a big question, but I'll hit the highlights here.
Okay.
Dr. Gross, as I already said to John, was well educated. Amherst, degree at Harvard, doctorate at Edinburgh, and he was a short man, very feisty. And when he came to New York, he got involved with one of the social agencies there and did a lot of work. But then he befriended George W. Henry, who was a psychiatrist, and who had done some beginning work in the field. So they worked together, and finally Dr. Gross, in one of our Episcopal churches in New York on the 6th Avenue and 20th Street, he was able to get an office, and so he began his really counseling ministry. He never was ordained, but I think he had a theological education. I don't think one writer has identified as being ordained, But I don't think that's true. That doesn't make much difference. He never said he was. But he was an Episcopalian, but I don't think he was very church-oriented. So he was dealing with all these people who were thrown out of their homes, their families, the church, their jobs, and everything else, who came to New York for kind of get lost. And they were lost. They didn't have jobs, they didn't have a place to stay, they didn't have any help. And so he was one of the people who really, in the early years, really reached out. At the same time, he was an excellent writer. He wrote, if you've seen any of the lectures and things he did, they were very fine. And he did a lot of writing. He wrote a book, Strangers in Our Midst, which was published by the YMCA Press, I think. And that's how I found him, was reading his book. Well, we became very good friends, and I brought him up here to Hartford, and I had a big clergy gathering at the cathedral, and so he helped us and all, and I'll try to keep this calm because I swear sometimes. There would be just repeating him because he swore. I was in his office one day and the telephone rang, and it was the FBI or one of those agencies, and they wanted to know if Dr. Gross knew anything about this person. And Dr. Gross said, "Well, I don't know. I'll look." So he was sitting at his desk, and he pulled out a desk drawer. He held the telephone over the drawer, and he ran the folders back and forth. And then he said, I don't know. I've looked through everything, and I don't seem to find anything on that. Yes, so hung up. Well, the GDSOBs, he said, why don't they mind their own business? that was Alfred Gross. He was very peppery, and he was quite a character. Also quite an egotist. Okay. But I liked the old fellow, and we were good friends.
Well, thank you for that story that you gave us on Dr. Gross. The next question deals with the 20 Club.
Yes.
20. Again, with the 20 Club, it was a transgender club that met in regards to, how can I say, differences in sexuality or mixed feelings about sexuality?
No, most of the 20 Club people were truly transsexual, and who had already begun to work with the Gender Identity Clinic. And they needed a place for some socialization and relationship with each other and to share things. And that's why I got that started with only 2 or 3. But we've had sometimes as many as 25 at a meeting. And also an information place where you could share. You need a lawyer. Who do you get? Well, I used somebody had a good lawyer or something. Those kind of things were happening, and just and they would always have a big picnic in the summertime, and it was socialization as well. Those people can be very lonely. You see, they don't fit into the gay situation. See. And they're not transvestite. I hope you know there's a very distinct difference between a transvestite and a transsexual.
Well, can you?
Yes, a transvestite is usually a male. There are some transvestite women, but they're mostly male, and they have a persona which is both masculine and feminine. They're not transsexual. They don't want to ever become a woman. Okay. They only want to act out this part of their identity. And they do it for the most part, well, in solo, or now there is a transvestite group in many communities, and there are transvestite national organizations. They just love to dress up and look beautiful and all those things, and it satisfies that ego. They're very interesting people. Most of them will have good jobs. They're teachers. They're postmen. They're carpenters. There are all sorts of people in there, and they usually are married. Most of the time, wives are understanding, and not always. Sometimes marriages collapse because of it. But it's called the Connecticut Outreach Society. That's the COS. They meet at the Quaker Meeting House out on Quaker Lane in Hartford. They meet a couple times a month. And the transsexual group and the transvestite, there's no enmity between them, but they are very different. I think one of the best ways to describe this, now I'm not sure this is a true story, I've heard it, but it may not be really true, of a man who obviously had money, and he owned a house which had two apartments, and one was for Harry, and the other was for Harriet. And one would be all dressed up, Harriet's would be all fancy and lovely, curly things. But the male persona would be very ordinary, kind of male home. And he would, whichever way he happened to feel, he would live in one house or the other. Now that's probably apocryphal, but it does shape up or point up that what it is, and so that's the transvestite. But that's not a transsexual, because they never want to. There may be some once in a while who start off transvestite and end up in the transsexual corridor, but that's not usually true.
Have you ever come across a case where, let's say somebody wanted to change their sexual gender, but then want to change back? Has that ever occurred?
Yes. Very rare. Very, very rare. I think of one person that did that, maybe two. But of course, you see, once we've worked with people who are transsexual and they've gone through the final surgery and all that, we lose contact.
Okay.
Very seldom do we hear. Now, just today, I got a call from California from someone who had their surgery. It used to come 8 years ago that it came to the 20 Club. I haven't heard from that person since they left Hartford. They've been all this time in there, and they've now had their surgery. And she needed to get her passport, and she needed to get her birth certificate changed. So she wanted to know if I could help. I fortunately have a transsexual a lawyer who works for the state. So I put her in touch with them, so we'll get it worked through. But you see, I wouldn't have had any contact with that person once they go off. Many of the transsexual people are highly educated,
right.
and the IQs are mostly are above a good average, if not many of them above. And some of them are, of course, today there's more acceptance. We had one person who worked in one of our big insurance companies, and in those days you had to be divorced. Before a surgeon would do surgery, he'd insist on divorce because he was afraid he might be sued by the spouse, you see, for taking away or the genitals of your partner.
Wow.
So we've insisted on divorce. So this couple went and got divorced. And the transsexual, held the job. Also, the person they'd been married to didn't want to leave, so they continued to live together. They happened to be Episcopalians, and their rector called me when this was all beginning, and I got him some materials so he understood, well, now this person came back to the church and now on the altar guild with the ladies of the same church that he grew up in. But so there's a little more liberality, than there used to be, and tolerance. But most of them do okay. And I don't know hardly any that have wanted to go shift back again. See, we're so careful. We don't want that to happen. That's why we just don't let people go to surgery unless we're pretty sure for their sakes.
Now, when you think about the idea of the church helping individuals change their sexuality, I mean, was the Episcopalian Church were they in favor of it?
There's really never been any big controversies on the transsexual situation. Okay. On the gay issue, yes, but not the transsexual, because the transsexual has such a support system with psychiatrists and psychologists and sociologists and so forth that I think the community respects that. And when somebody does do this, it's all right. As far as the moral issue, many years ago, the Catholic Society, what was it called? Catholic, can't remember. They would issue comments. And they did one time on transsexuals and says it's too new for us to make any opinion. So they kind of left it at that. And I don't know what really is a position in the Roman Catholic Church. Our own church has made our Episcopal Church. There are many of the other churches where, well, as I was saying to John, clergy themselves who have transitioned and then kept their orders and were allowed to still function.
I just have a few more questions for you, Reverend. I know that the Catholic Church started up a ministry called Dignity.
Dignity, right.
Okay. And the Episcopalian Church also had their own ministry in Integrity.
Integrity, right.
Okay. Could you just enlighten us about that ministry, or I'm not sure, is the New Way ministry under that, or is that something different?
No, it just means within the communions.
Okay.
For instance, Integrity I started the Integrity group in Hartford, and they met in my home in the very first, and then we met in the churches. We never had any trouble having churches that had us there. And the Roman, that's Integrity. That's pretty well respected now, and they're getting political, which is important. And they're going to conventions and fighting for resolutions. They have a big office in Washington now. They publish a very good booklet, pamphlet, or magazine, really. Mm-hmm. And the Quakers and Unitarians and the Congregationalists, all those people, they've been all pretty liberal. We've got a few conservative Baptist churches, pretty much with a kind of southern background. Of course, the South is always less, it's more orthodox, more conservative.
I see. Okay. I guess I don't know if it would be considered one final question, but there was one individual, they considered him the pioneer in the gay liberation movement, Foster Gunnarsson.
Oh goodness, yeah, we're very good friends.
If I could just ask you to, let us know about.
Yeah, Foster Gunnarsson came from a fairly wealthy family. He got 2 master's degrees at Trinity College. He came here to live in Hartford. He ended up in the Bushnell Towers.
Mm-hmm.
When he died, he owned 4 apartments, all filled. He was a collector of all sorts of things, big train man, but also in the gay movement he kept all sorts of things. He was never a very open person. He was open to, first I don't think he ever came to the integrity meeting, or he wasn't very much of a religious man anyway. But he would help support things from time to again. If I ever asked him for money for something, he would help. But we were good friends socially, and he loved the opera. We'd always have dinner before operas, things like that. And his other great interest was smoking. He loved cigars, and he hated the fact that he felt that we were really being bad, or most cigar people were being bad. So he supported the smokers, and he helped the magazine, Smokers Magazine. He was one of the backers for that. He was bachelor, he never got married. He always claimed he was homosexual. He always was part of the early movement. He was much involved in the early movements in New York and things like that. But his was more on an intellectual level, a lot of it, I think. He wasn't a hands-on person, except in terms of, he did some writing, I think. But I knew him, I knew his mother, and we were good friends. He dropped dead. I had his funeral, in fact, and he was had a service up at Trinity College, Gaston, and he just dropped dead one day.
So,
unfortunately, all the stuff that he had on the gay movement all went to the University of Connecticut.
Really?
Yes, all went to stores. And I tried to get it to go to Central, but his cousin, Mrs. Henstenberg, she was overwhelmed. She had these 4 apartments to all clear out, and he was an ascetic too. He didn't even have a bed. He slept on a mattress on the floor. He left $1 million and more, but he was an odd stick. Nice guy, but an odd stick, And so she just was so overwhelmed that she wanted to get all of his collections in one place, and UConn would take it. And apparently, I don't know if she approached Central or not. But we're still hoping to get that stuff over to Central. I don't know if it'll happen. At least they're beginning to open the boxes and find what's there, but they've been sitting there since Foster died.
And this is at UConn?
And UConn, yeah. But there's a lot of material that he's got, because he was definitely one of the pioneers. Yeah.
Were there any others that we haven't mentioned?
Well, of course, there are. Yeah, sure there are. But I've been out of that circle now for a long time. I used to see lots of them when I get to all the meetings and conventions and things. But that's now, you see, 16 years. My poor old brain has trouble to remember what I ate for breakfast sometimes. So it's hard to go back, but there were some really good people. There's a book in the library there, and it traces the early years, and a lot of those names will be in there in their contributions. Because see, there was the Mattistine Society, there was One Incorporated, there was Daughters of Belitas. These were all the early. When I was in New York doing my graduate degrees, I used to go and sit in with the West Side group, I guess, and that was a early New York group. And there was the first gay bookstore there. I used to know that lad, and that was down around Sheridan Square. And then he was always having his windows smashed out and all those things. The same store exists, but I think it's over a little up. It's still in the village there, in Gaysby. And that person's died, but I just know. You take me back a lot of years.
I'll be honest with you, I really have no more questions to ask you. But if there was one thing, and I know you alluded to the fact earlier with the interview to John, what was your greatest accomplishment in this field? I would ask if there was any important area that you could recall. What
kind of something dramatic or climactic or something?
Yeah, I guess so. In your span of working in this field, what was the most, I guess, exciting, the most, like you say, climactic?
Well, to publish your first book is always a big moment, and especially at that time, which was very controversial. I think I lost a few friends on that. But I think I said this to John, the cathedral itself was the first to have a party and the book signing. And Alan Tull was the chaplain at Trinity College. He was a priest at Episcopal Church. And he was at the party, and he heard Mrs. James Goodwin, who probably was one of the richest ladies in town and one of the most distinguished and well-known, say to Eleanor Brewster, whose father was one of the early bishops of our church and also a distinguished family, he overheard her saying to Eleanor, "Isn't it lovely Clinton has written a book on homosexuality?" So I thought we'd arrived. So as I say, I said that to John. I had very little, probably no trouble in the cathedral. Mm-hmm. But I also said to them, I think that one of the things that made it possible to do what I did was the fact that I'd been there 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I had done the youth work of the cathedral and the diocese. So I was somewhat of a trusted person, I think, and then I had been, the cathedral those days was a pretty big congregation, we had a couple of thousand people, and so everything seemed all right.
Final question is this: at what stage of your career did you think everything started to, how could I say, peak and just, level off?
It never leveled off.
It never leveled off. Okay.
It's still not leveling off.
Okay.
I don't know. I worked till I was 70. I'll be 86 on Friday. I retired in 1986, but I've been working in 4 small churches, preaching every Sunday, and I have a funeral tomorrow. I have to go to a conference in Hartford for 6 hours tomorrow after the funeral. I'm chaplain at Kiwanis. I'm the trustee of my college. Involved in far too many things. So there's no level. You see, the reason for this is because I had my annual physical with my doctor, and he said, well, everything's fine. So I said, what's kind of your attitude? And I said, well, my basic attitude is I don't plan on dying. And he said, well, that's good, I think. So I just keep going. Maybe it'd be like the one-horse shave, just fell apart all at once. Anyway, just keep going.
Well, Reverend, I truly thank you for this opportunity.
Well, it's a great privilege to share with you.
You have definitely enlightened us on the homosexual information world.
Well, it's going to open up more and more. I'm sure it will. And it's just not here, but other countries have been far more liberal. Take the Scandinavian situation. I've been all around Scandinavia, and I used to meet with many of the groups there. And my goodness, they were way ahead of us. And this is true in, I think, the Netherlands, very open. I would say it's even more. Of course, there was a time in Germany when they were way out front. During those pre-war days in Berlin. Christopher Isherwood, did that name mean anything to you? He was, what was the play that was built on his thing? Well, I did a thing I did an essay on Christopher Isherwood. It's in The Gay Academic, which is a book of essays. And there was a very real, quite homosexual lifestyle in Berlin in those years. And his book, The Berlin Stories, is what was of it. And a couple of very good plays have been written on his work. So England has been a little slower. There was the Albany Society of England in London. But I went to England. I did 2 lecture series in England, moving from one, almost always within either a church organization or a college organization, and Scotland too. So they're moving, but they're a little slower than the continent, I think. But of course, we've been slowed up here in this country by the strict religious community. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church is very strong in this country, and they just don't move very well. But there's a very real challenge ahead here, and that's going to be our society beginning to figure out and to study and understand not the homosexuality, the sexuality of children. I'm very distressed with what's happened in the Roman Catholic Church with all of this homosexual thing. It's put a very bad eye on the homosexual situation. And a lot of it's not fair because many of these clergy that were involved with teenage boys, and that are 14, 15, 16, 17, you know perfectly well, excuse my language, they're horny as the dickens that age. You couldn't be any more sexual than you are when you're 15, 16, 17 years old. And I think many times these boys have been the perpetrators. I think they have found that some of those young Roman Catholic priests were very attractive, and of course they were celibate, you see, and they had no sexual life. Of course, celibacy is the most abnormal sexual word. It's celibacy. I mean, I think it's almost immoral. I don't see why anybody should be asked to give up their sexual life. Certainly not for our Lord. I mean, our Lord is much more of an open person than that kind of thing. And so I think, and beyond that is, I cut a little something out of the paper just 2 or 3 days ago. I think it's right on my desk. And this idea of the sexuality of children.
It's okay. We're just taking a break here. The Reverend went to go get something. He'll be right back.
It's all right. I'm just reading something in the paper here.
Yeah, that's fine.
Police here have arrested 3 boys in the past week in connection with 3 unrelated sexual assault investigations. Sergeant John Maston, who heads the Child Investigation Section, said today, Police Sunday arrested a 15-year-old boy on charges he sexually assaulted an 8-year-old girl. The boy is charged with 5 counts each of 4th-degree sexual assault and risk of injury to a minor. He was sent to the Hartford Detention Center for an appearance today in Hartford Juvenile Court. On Thursday, police arrested a 14-year-old boy on charges he sexually assaulted an 11-year-old girl. Police said he was charged with 1st-degree sexual assault, 4th-degree sexual assault, and risk of injury to a minor. The investigation that led to the boy's arrest began in July. On Wednesday, police charged an 11-year-old boy with 4th-degree sexual assault and risk of injury to a minor in connection with the sexual assault of a 7-year-old girl. That tells us that people are sexual. Children are sexual. And, well, I think we're probably sexual since birth. Some doctor I was talking to, he said, the minute the baby boy is born, the first thing he does is reach down to his genitals. Stories of old babies who rock back and forth on the floor and get erections and so forth. Sure. And I had one of my counselees years ago was a young man. When he was 12 years old, he lived in New York. He came from a very wealthy, well-known family. And when he was 12, he was gay, of course. He used to walk his dog every night, and it was just so he could pick up men. He was a male prostitute, 12 years old, homosexual. So, kids are not innocent. And I said to this society that I had that little honor in May, I said that there's some hard work ahead here to really begin to deal with the sexuality of the child and the young adult and so forth. And I'm not ready for taking that on. So some of the people that follow on that one, but it needs to be done. You know, is this the idea of child innocence? You know, just because children they're not innocent necessarily. And there's been some very interesting plays and things that have been done on that. Adults who found themselves in serious situations because they were involved out of their will by a child, and sometimes it was all false. They dream up the stories. They get mad about something and they do something. So that's heterosexual.
Yeah. Well, again, Reverend, we thank you for the opportunity to gather this information from you for the archives. I'm sure the class will welcome you when you, well, again, we haven't decided when you would come to visit us.
Is that to be that's another day?
Yes.
Yeah, that's this coming Wednesday.
Is it this Wednesday?
Yeah, it's
okay.
November 6th.
I don't know. We may be in trouble there. We'll see what we got.
Well, if not,
you don't have to look now since we're filming right now.
Oh, okay.
No, we can discuss it after, really.
Oh, okay.
If I can interrupt, there's one more question that while Isaac and you were doing the interview that I thought about in my head was what explains you mentioned Scandinavia and the Netherlands and even Germany for being ahead of say the United States with accepting homosexuality and things of that sort.
Well,
what
this
do
is
you
a
think?
quick answer, but probably not. I don't know how significant. But take Scandinavia. It's not very Roman Catholic. The same would be true, I think, of the Netherlands, the Dutch Church, Dutch Reform and so forth. In Germany, of course, Germany is pretty well divided, between the Roman Catholic areas and the Protestant ones. But I think Berlin was kind of a freed place. France, of course, has always been pretty strong Roman Catholic, and I'm sure there are homosexual situations in France. In fact, one of the leaders there, whom I knew very well and lectured there, he worked both with gay people and with transsexuals, and he was fine. He was a clergyman. He was a Baptist, I think. He was murdered. The police, some people, they just came and took him out and shot him in the woods. That's very sad. But he was out too far. I mean, he did radio things, and he was a good person. I liked him. He did some good writing too, but that was very sad. So France has been, I think, more difficult, as I see it. I don't know as other parts of the world. They vary, I guess. I think China and Japan, they're pretty closed. They don't hear much about this. I know that there are. You see, we do believe that Kinsey sex rating scale, whether 4% of the population may be homosexual. And all the teaching I did, I used to use that basic curve, from totally homosexual to totally heterosexual.
Bell curve.
In the bell curve, yeah. And, but I think conservatively, you could say probably 4% are probably confirmed homosexual, both for men and for women. But then there's the whole spectrum. I mean, the bisexual. I was doing another book on the bisexual, in fact, and it's chapters and chapters done, but I ran out of steam finally, and I couldn't get the kind of publisher I want. Macmillan said they would do it, and then they decided not to do it. So I didn't. They didn't have a whole book. Well, I never had to do a whole text and get it approved. I always got the approval before I wrote. It's too much work to do it, not have any, So I didn't follow that one through. But there's some good books now. At that point, there was hardly anything on bisexuality, but there are a lot of bisexual people in our society. So, another field to plow. They do that. Well, now back to this class thing. I don't know.
Should I stop the tape now?
Oh yeah. Again, Reverend.
Oh,
Good.
thanks. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we're on.
We're on.
We're on.
All right.
Goodbye. See you later.
See you later.